Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the most important players for the title contenders this upcoming year, but now it's time for a Hot Take Thursday, and this one's a little bit of a doozy. I do not think Florida State or Clemson will be in Charlotte at the end of the year, and that's insane. I fully understand that. That is definitely going out on a limb. That is definitely something that the limb could snap under me. I fully believe that that is definitely a case, but I'll get to why I think that I'll break down both of those teams and then get into some other teams that I think could definitely make some noise in this conversation. So let's start with Florida State and let's break down what this team is right now. So you bring in DJ, you bring in Malik Benson, you bring in Roydell Williams. All of those guys are really good players and definitely could be big time players for them in the future. Could definitely be guys that you're watching make remarkable plays for them as the season goes on. But I think when you talk about a lot of this stuff, when you get into some of the weeds of this stuff, Florida State has done an incredible job of building out this group, right? They've done an incredible job of building out a transfer portal class that pretty much year over year is going to be talented, is going to be tough to deal with. But also, when you look at Florida State right now, last year it felt like they brought in grade A players from the portal. They brought in Keon Coleman a couple of years ago. They brought in Jared Verse a couple of years ago. It just felt like they were bringing in players that were outright game changers, no two questions about it. They were going to be big time players for them. Now it feels like they're bringing in grade B players, and it's not necessarily that these players aren't good. They're definitely players that could get up to that A level and definitely could be big time players for them, but I don't know. You look at DJ Uiagalelei, you look at Roydell Williams, you look at Malik Benson, and I'm not confident that any of those guys are the one at that position. I think DJ is going to be the one, but I don't necessarily have quite as much love for him to be the guy that they need him to be. I guess is probably the best way to put it. And then you have the Florida State defense is going to be good. I don't have many doubts there. I don't think there's any question about that. And it's going to be tough to beat them because you're going to have to score a ton of points. There's no two ways about that. But also, when you look at this team, I'm not necessarily sure if they're going to be able to score a ton of points. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do some of the things they were able to do a year ago and be explosive on offense and have Jordan Travis with his legs stretching out defenses and doing remarkable things. And all of that stuff kind of combined, you can do as much as you want on defense, but if the offense isn't making it happen, and especially if DJ is giving the ball away the way he did the past couple of years, you're going to have a problem. That's just kind of the plain simple truth there. So I think Florida State is good. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the conference. I just worry that there's going to be a couple of games where this offense comes out entirely flat and it costs them a chance to go to Charlotte. But let's go into Clemson and give you guys an idea of what I think about them, because this one is not quite as much a matter of seeing holes in the roster and worrying too much about specific position groups. It's more about just the energy around this team. I think when you look at the last two seasons, you had a really, really rough year the first time, and you got to the ACC title even with a rough year, so gives you an idea of what Clemson is at right now. But the reality is you have so many different things to kind of factor into this conversation. Garrett Riley and Kay Klubnik were never quite on the same page a year ago, and they absolutely have to be if they're going to avoid what they did a year ago and going 9-3 and missing the ACC title game and not being the team that they wanted to be by any means. Also, I do think this offense is going to benefit from a guy like Bryant Wesco at wide receiver, but also if your expectation is to have a freshman wide receiver lead your be your go-to guy and lead you to an ACC title game, I wouldn't love that bet. I think Bryant Wesco is a fantastic player and will be a great player for quite some time to come, but the reality is he's not necessarily, you don't necessarily want to lean on a freshman wide receiver is probably the best way to put it. It was the same reason why Texas went out and got all the receivers they did. Jonte Cook's a fantastic player and definitely could be a big-time player for them, but he'd only caught 8 passes in his entire college career up until that point. So you don't really know until they get on the field, and I'm a little bit worried about that. And the biggest one for me is the back end of this defense took a big time hit. You lost Andrew Makuba, you lost Toriano Pride Jr., you lost Nate Wiggins to the NFL draft. and they kind of just stayed pat. Now, they have really good players in that room. They have A.J. Terrell's little brother. They have a ton of really good talent. There's no two ways about that. When you're at Clemson, you're going to have talent. But can you match that level that they had last year? Can you get even better than they were last year? Because that wasn't necessarily the strength of that team a year ago. So I think it's going to be one of those things where, kind of like Florida State and that offense kind of sputtering at times, I think the same thing could happen to Clemson, first of all. But also, I think the back end of this defense could just get torched a game or two by, Cam Ward or by maybe DJ, I don't know, but by someone, and definitely make this defense look a lot worse than it really is. So I have, maybe they're a little bit niche worries. Maybe they're, sky is falling type worries where it's not really going to be that big of a deal. But I think when you look at this ACC schedule and this ACC conference going into this year, there are tons of teams that are ready to take that crown. Not necessarily on the same level as Florida State and Clemson from a roster perspective or from, a history perspective, obviously. But there are tons of teams that are right there. I think when you talk about this conference, you obviously should talk about Miami. Miami is going to be the biggest threat here. There's no two ways about that. They're plus 450, to win the ACC this upcoming year. And some of the things they did in this offseason are obviously things that Clemson had no intention of doing this offseason with bringing in some of the portal guys, but also it feels like they brought in grade A portal guys where Florida State brought in grade B. And it's not that, there's this massive gargantuan gap between the two, but it feels like Miami, attacked that a little bit more aggressively and did a little bit more, I guess, hard work, a little bit more grinding to get to that point. So I definitely think they're going to be a fascinating team to watch. In fact, let's look at some of the ACC odds here in the top, I believe, 7 teams here. You have Florida State up top at plus 280, obviously. You have Clemson right there behind them at plus 310. But then you have Miami lurking right there at plus 450, as we just talked about. Definitely a guy or a team that could make as much noise as really anyone in the entire country. They could win the ACC. They could go to the playoff. They could do some things that a lot of people are not expecting them to do and maybe not be ready for Miami to do. Then you have Louisville and NC State right there kind of clumped together at plus 600, plus 700. Two teams that I definitely think could hit the ground running this year. Now, there's a little bit of worry for me around these teams because you're bringing in a new quarterback. Grayson McCall played really, really good football at Coastal Carolina. I think he will carry that over, and I think he'll be a good player for them. Tyler Shuck, I'm not quite as sold on, but definitely when you have Jeff Brom on that staff, he does incredible jobs with quarterbacks and definitely is someone that can put him in positions to succeed. So I'd expect him to at least be competent. And then when you look at some of these other pieces that these teams have, it feels like they're a dangerous team to play. You never want to get them away from home. You never want to really get them in general because any given Saturday they could pop up on you and not only beat you, but probably beat you by about 14 points, depending on the way that things go. So I think those are two teams to watch. And then some kind of longer shots, but I have a really good reason to believe in these teams. Virginia Tech and SMU. Virginia Tech at plus 1,400, SMU at plus 1,800. And they have something that none of the teams in front of them do, which is an experienced quarterback that has been in that system. Now, Cade Klubnik has been in that system, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a veteran or someone that has been through the fire quite as much as I would want him to be up until this point. Kyron Drones has. Preston Stone has. Both those guys are going to be hugely important to the ACC this upcoming year, and they're not going to hand you games, which is probably the biggest thing in this upcoming year for the ACC, where you have a lot of teams that are dangerous. You have a lot of teams that could make some noise, and you'll find that a lot of teams that find their way up to the mountaintop are the teams that don't create problems for themselves. They don't get a lot of penalties. They don't have a lot of picks from their quarterbacks. They don't have a lot of turnovers or mistakes, basically. And I think those are two teams that absolutely could fit that mold. So whether you're, Florida State, I know, has to travel to Dallas to play SMU. When you do that, you got to be really careful because going to Dallas, first of all, is something that Florida State is probably not very used to by any means, but also SMU is not going to play any games. They are fully ready to come into this conference and kick the door down and become a team that is going to be reckoned with for quite some time. So that's a game I'm watching very closely. I think Florida State has Miami and SMU away from home. Two games that are going to be super important to whether or not they find their way into the ACC championship. Clemson has Florida State at Florida State and Virginia Tech away from home. So a couple of the teams we just talked about could be the ones that throw a wrench into this entire work for these two teams. So overall, I fully understand this is crazy. I fully understand that these two teams are going to be the class of the conference going into it, and likely have a very good chance of one of them at least making the title game. But it feels like more this year than pretty much any other year in the ACC, at least recently. There are tons of teams that could do it. There are tons of teams that could clip their wings in week 5, week 7, whatever it looks like, and ruin their chances to get into the ACC title. And I am looking at the ACC more and more closely, and the more I look at it, I think we're going to have some type of tiebreaker scenario at the end of this. I think there's going to be maybe 3 or 4 like 2-loss teams that you're going to have to figure out how they fit with the tiebreakers and the head-to-head and everything in between. So it'll be fascinating to watch this unfold. I'm not going to make a pick right now because I feel like that would be a little bit irresponsible. I have one in my head that I really want to pick, but I'll leave that alone for the time being. I think if the football gods are ACC fans in any way also, there's no way that Florida State and Clemson are making this as they're about to leave the conference. So that might have factored into this just a little bit hoping the football gods are on the ACC side and my side in this scenario. But it'll be fascinating to watch this conference unfold. I think them and the Big 10, or Big 12, excuse me, are the two most interesting conferences in the entire country because you got no idea who's going to come out of there. So it's going to be fascinating to watch that one unfold. I think a lot of people will likely throw this back in my face around November, but at the end of the day, this is what it's all about, right? But that'll do it. That'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. We have your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on all the social pages: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We're all over the place with a ton of great people doing great work across every single sport you could think of. So if you need wrestling, if you need soccer, if you need baseball, we have you covered over here. So no worries about that. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.